One of the things that I first did and the mistakes I first made when I started looking at scaling my business even more is I picked like 5 pathways. Like, oh, I can scale this way, from this way, this way, this way, and this way. And the mistake of that is that you need to focus on that one pathway really intensely in order to know if it's going to work or not.
Elimination is more important to growth than adding stuff. And I have advisors here, and even my own life and Daren's life, that we can prove to you that elimination is key to growth.
You have to switch up the garden beds, right? And let the garden beds rest. And there's a season for all clients. There's a season for all orgs. And understanding that seasonality is a big part of how you learn to say no and yes to what. Welcome back. This is our 4th episode of how to scale your business as an advisor, right? So we're 2 schmoes who wrote a book called Broken Dealer because we both left these big behemoth brokerages because we wanted to set out and truly serve the client. So today's all about your client and how do you know who to serve, when to serve, what to serve, and how that helps you scale, and why getting really clear about your ideal client avatar is important. So, Carm, let's start off with, I'm imagining you started off much like I did, where it was when you were building your business, you tried to take anything you possibly could that fogged a mirror as a client.
The mirror test, right? So coming from the insurance company background as an advisor for 17 years, you were told to work with the person that was putting $50 a month into a 529 plan because you know that they were going to eventually need life insurance or their parents need long-term care or whatever, right? That's the scarcity mindset. So you fogged a mirror. I'll meet with you whenever, wherever, and you needed at-bats. That's how we measured it back then, with really no regard to, is this client ideal for me? Or even better, what is an ideal client? Who do I best serve? What's the best use of my time? Because back then, time wasn't even something that we thought about. We just had to grind and get after it. So it's nights, it was weekends, it was everything, where today, much more intentionality with every decision that we make here. And I know you do the same thing as well. Speaking to advisors around the country, it really is surprising that most don't have a client avatar. And let's just go in and we're mention this a couple times here. Client avatar or ideal client profile, ICP, whatever you want to call it, is who do you serve the best?
Let me do this. Let's back it up and let's talk about why people are so scared to have an avatar, right? Because I think there's a unique psychology there with it. I know when I started out my business, the company that I worked for had this award if you put on 120 accounts in like your first year in the business. And so of course you're like, oh, you show me the incentives and I'll show you the behavior.
Yeah.
Right. So the incentives are set up and structured to take anything that fogs a mirror. But I also found myself like in a unique place where when I was starting to realize that I had way too many accounts, way too many clients, I couldn't serve everybody. I was constantly just running, trying to keep up with everything. There was this fear that I had around getting really clear and selective. And that kind of hung me up from saying, no, this is who I work with. This is who I best serve. And so it's normal to feel fear. So if you're an advisor out there and you have this kind of fear wall around, no, I'm going to be really clear about who I serve. And because you take that leap of faith and say, no, these are the people that I serve best. You say no to people. And then it's like, well, should I have said no to that person? In fact, just this weekend, I had 2 tax clients reach out wanting us to do their tax returns this late in the year. I'm not a CPA or EA, but I have people who work for our firm that are. And I said, it's too late in the season. We're not meeting with anyone individually, and we're only taking clients on extension. But I felt it again. It was like this, oh, wait, should I have said yes to those clients? Like, am I walking away from something? It's trained into you, right?
It is. And I think, even people with abundance mentalities, which is where we are today, there's so much business out there. We almost have to, even with abundance mentalities, we have to remind ourselves of that. Because our default is business equals yes. I don't care what it is. You almost have to pause and say, wait, okay, so there's a filter, and let's walk through the filter. Does this make sense? Like, what are the needs of the clients? What revenue is this relationship going to generate? Is this a gateway opportunity or just a transaction? Like, go through this kind of filter. And, our coach, Joe Lucas, says it the best. There's only so many seats in the bus. So when you're intentionally trying to scale, know that you can't be everything to everybody, and you're going to have capacity issues. Like, you and I both know advisors who burn out because they're taking on the $5,000 or $10,000 account or whatever. And even, like, to your point of, you have to open up 120 accounts with no regard to the value of the account, didn't matter to the firm. The insurance company side was, hey, you're going to get this bonus. They called it case rate bonuses, where you just had to get a certain amount of life insurance cases in. They didn't care what it was. Didn't matter. And they paid these bonuses based on how many cases you got per quarter. And you know how many times that, people were writing policies on their kids, and, a small $8 policy on their kid just to get a case rate bonus. The company wanted that. That was a win for them. But at the end of the day, who loses in that regard? You do. Your clients do, because you're basically reducing a client down to a transaction. But when you're really intentional, that's when the tide shifts. That's when time becomes a currency, and you're more intentional on, hey, I want to serve doctors. Great. What are their biggest concerns? And talk about scaling. And Dr. Ben Hardy talks about this. It's got to be a simple process, a very repeatable, scalable process in order to scale. If you're taking on doctors to business owners to attorney, all these different, if you're everything to everybody, how hard is that to scale? Because all the problems are different. Imagine if you took on one. I know someone that specializes in all things auto body shops. His whole internal process is around the key issues and concerns of auto body owners. Now, how easy is this for him to have a conversation with the same client avatar 4 or 5 times a week? Or how easy is it for his staff to be able to prepare any of the financial plans or exit planning that he's doing? The cases are, I wouldn't say they're 100% the same, but I'd say 75% of it's the same. So that makes it scalable because it's repeatable.
And there's another benefit of doing what you're suggesting, Carmen, and that is that, bringing the discussion about AI, right? Like, if you look at the evolution of our business and the evolution of this career, and, it used to be that advisors effectively sold access to the markets, right? They go to mom and pop America and say, hey, you want to buy some stocks or bonds? And they would sell access into the markets. And then all of a sudden we got these discount brokers like Schwab and whatnot that gave the access to the market for next to nothing. And then it was, now we sell information, how to financial plan, how to build out your wealth management future. With AI coming on board, it can do all those knowledge-based work so much better than humans already. And we're just getting going with it. And so if you look at where I think this industry is headed, it's focusing on that concierge experience for people around wealth. And when you think about the niching, it becomes even more important, because the only way you can create that full concierge experience is knowing intimately, here's what auto body people deal with on a day-to-day basis, or firefighters, or whatever it is. XYPN Network for years has been preaching this niching to riches, this niche down your business. But when we look at it from a scaling lens, it's absolutely critical that you get really clear about this is who we serve and how we serve them and how we create value, because the value creation equation or methodology that your firm needs to deploy is going to become even more critical as we move forward here into the next generation of wealth managers. And that it's just because where AI is going, right? Like, the advisor who thinks they're a generalist to everybody, they're dying, and they might not realize it, but they're on the golf course, and they're, I don't know, hit on golfers, but just the classic advisor who spends half his time on golf courses and not managing his business. And he's got some assistant there that knows all the clients and does all the work, and he's just taking the paycheck, right? And what we're advocating here is, like, you can do more with your business. You can scale. It's the type of people we'd be interested in talking to, right? Is growth, scale, build. And to build into the future, you have to create this incredible concierge service around everything you offer your clients.
Yeah. And I had a conversation with someone this past weekend about how I think advisors in those constrained environments that we were in, the advisors aren't bad necessarily. I know a lot of people in those environments that are fantastic advisors, fantastic people, always do the right thing. It's the environment that will control them because there's consequences to not, checking the boxes of, these parent firms. It could be literally benefits to your kids, payout, everything, right? So they're kind of controlled, which forces them to work with clients that are not in their avatar. So for me, for example, I charged my first financial planning fee back in '05 at an insurance company where I was the first one in my whole office to do it. They had one person managing 13,000 agents at the time for financial planning. It's one person at home office. But I knew that's what I wanted to do when I came in the industry.
Yeah.
Is I just wanted to do that. But I had to satisfy their selling requirements. So I was forced to take people that didn't need a financial plan, that just needed some kind of product placement. So for half the year, I was working for their goal. The other half of the year, I was working towards my goals. So I was really working half the year without being on a golf course, like you said. And it's very hard to niche if it's conflicting with your parent firm, let's put it that way. Because if your niche is to sell life insurance and you're at a life insurance company, great. Or if your niche is to open up as many investment accounts and you're at a brokerage house that values that kind of advisor, then you have alignment and you probably be just fine. But if your niche, if your client avatar looks and it's contrary to what the firm's vision is, you're gonna, like you and I both had, every year there's a little more friction, a little more disalignment to the point where I call it drips every year, to the point that pipe's going to break and you're going to look for the exit. Let's just hope that you're in a position where your client avatar is in alignment with your firm. And if it's not, I could speak on behalf of Daren and I and every advisor that we've extracted and every advisor that I know that has extracted, the sooner the better.
Yeah, I mean, it's just death by 1,000 knife cuts, right? And I think every advisor knows that. And then,
Yeah.
but let's go back to scaling. Let's be really clear why scaling it's so important to have a clear client avatar. And that is because your operational systems and processes need to stay simple, right? And if you're serving too many different types of clients, then your operational systems become complexity, right? And you won't scale because the weight of the operation will weigh you down in a way that you won't be able to grow, right? So you have to be really clear. And Dr. Ben Hardy talks about pathways. And when you think about pathways to scale, one of the things that I first did and the mistakes I first made when I started looking at scaling my business even more is I picked like 5 pathways, like, oh, I can scale this way, from this way, this way, this way, and this way. And the mistake of that is that you need to focus on that one pathway really intensely in order to know if it's going to work or not. And if you pick 5 different pathways, then you won't get the intensity you need in order to determine if it's going to work to scale your org. So getting really clear about who that avatar is, picking one pathway, and then catering all the operations and the systems around that pathway, that's what's going to drive the scaling, right? So you need that goal, which is I call it the frame, or in science of scaling, they call it the frame, right? And the frame has to be big enough to create anxiety in you, right? And part of the reason that a lot of advisors end up in the golf course is because they've set their bar too low and they haven't created any goal anxiety. So you create a goal, and you really focus on that goal and build those pathways towards that goal. But there has to be a certain degree of anxiety in order to achieve that. The frame, the floor, and the focus. And then there's a concept of floor that we talk about in scaling methodologies. And the idea of floor is that there's people you're working with now you literally cannot afford to work with if you want to scale. And you've got to figure out how to transition those relationships into something different if you're going to scale, which is very hard to do. A lot of advisors struggle with. But it's about being clear about your floor. And if you're not saying no on a regular basis, I promise you, you have no floor. And then that allows you to focus on the pathway.
Couple things here. Going back to niching or having a focus on who you serve the best, and you're doing any type of marketing, imagine how effective your marketing is going to be if you have one message, you have one audience. So let's just say it's doctors. You know, the top 3 biggest problems and concerns doctors have that keep them up at night financially, there is all of the focus of any marketing that you're doing is you're touching on those biggest concerns. But imagine you have 5 or 6 different audiences. Now you don't have a standard voice. It's multiple voices. It won't resonate as well as having one. So your conversion rate with marketing goes way up once you specialize. And the goal or the frame, as Daren put it, as Dr. Ben Hardy puts it, it's got to change behavior today. That's one of the filters. You can have a 10-year goal, but if it's not changing your behavior today, it's a placeholder. It's a milestone, really. I don't like to use the word goal because that kind of that signifies you've arrived. So if you have a 10-year milestone, I'll say make that your new 3-year milestone. Because 10 years, that's a long ways away, right? But 3 years is right around the corner. So if you're really serious about hitting that milestone, then you should be changing behavior today.
Let's pause right there, Carm, because I think that's such an important point, and I think you teach this principle great. And that is that one of the quick ways to get yourself a frame or a goal that seems impossible is think about your 10-year goal and then make it a 3-year goal. Like, and the minute you do that, you're going to feel this anxiety in your gut going like, I'm crazy. And that's what they're talking about with the big goals, right? Like, how do you do that? Because it has to force the behavioral change.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why I think it's so important to have like karmas in my life and other advisors I have in my life who are doing these things, because there's a certain accountability, right? Carm and I are going to get together in Florida actually this weekend and with 12 other advisors. And we sit there and there's like this whole circle of accountability. Like, what did you do to scale, dude? And that's really powerful. So I think another kind of trick is surround yourself or find a group of like-minded people who want to push the envelope. And if you don't have that, create one, because without it, it's really hard to hold yourself accountable to those goals that just create anxiety. And you're like, oh, I think I'm just going to go with half that this year.
You know, that's a great point. I spoke at our advisor event in Greenville, South Carolina in October about this. And we went through your basic 10-year, 3-year, 1-year business plan. And then I challenged the room. I said, you knew 3-year milestone is what your 10-year vision was. And the room went silent. Now, that's a challenge, right? But when you think differently, is that okay, you're 10 years now, you're 3-year. That's a big ask, right? It doesn't make it harder. That's the misconception. It makes it different. And what is different about it is, back to pathway thinking, is when you want to grow 2x, there's 5, 6 different things you can do, and you'll grow, you won't scale. But if you want to scale, there's only 1 or 2 pathways that can get you there. And you have to be disciplined in eliminating the pathways that may be serving you today. You may be getting clients from those pathways, but are they ideal? And is it going to be fast enough to hit your 10-year milestone in 3 years? If it's not, scrap it. And the faster you do it, your focus, your energy can go to the 1 or 2 pathways that can only get your 10-year milestone in 3 years. It is a different way of thinking. It took me a while to kind of understand it. It took 2 great books, 10X Easier Than 2X, and then The Science of Scaling. I recommend reading both in that order. And it all came together for me because it all makes sense, because we only have so many hours in a day. And where focus goes, energy flows, for sure. So if you're focused on a pathway that can scale, not grow, then you're on the right track. It's just, it takes a different mindset, and it takes discipline to eliminate. And not a lot of people have that, but I think that's one thing. If you were to change anything this year or today about scaling, is to elimination is more important to growth than adding stuff. And I have advisors here, and even my own life and Daren's life, that we can prove to you that elimination is key to growth.
Yeah, if you're not eliminating different aspects of your business, because it's just natural when you build a business for it to take on a life of its own, and things start showing up. And we had this really great example. Actually, it's a little bit, but we were doing a bunch of branding for our YouTube show. And then one day I just looked at the branding and I'm like, why is this color like bluish neon? This isn't our color. Where'd it come from? And I went back to the marketing team, like, why are we using this? And they're like, well, we thought it's what you wanted. And I'm like, it's not even close to what our brand identity is. Like, and and I think that's just an example of how like it happens in business. Like it's this chaos, confusion. Peter Drucker has a great quote. He says, three things happen naturally in organizations: friction, confusion, and underperformance. And everything else requires leadership. And so there's always this friction, confusion, and underperformance going on in orgs. And so part of the job of the leader is to be selective in what you say yes to and what you say no to. And that is perhaps one of the most important roles that as a CEO or as a president of an organization that you're leading is setting the direction by saying no. And that includes with clients, right? Getting rid of clients. We actually have a rule in our organization that any of my staff are allowed to recommend firing of clients. We're not going to always agree to it because there's reasons why we'll have to keep like a part of a family over another, but it's but they all have the right to say this client doesn't treat me respectfully. This is not a good client. They're a waste of my time. And I actually suggest to growing advisors that if you're not graduating a chunk of your book on a monthly, annual, whatever, regular basis, you're making a mistake because your book is, and I always equate it to like a garden, right? Like I love to garden, the hippie in me, Carm,
Mm-hmm. You do.
out in the orchard or the garden, like different plants at different times of the year grow, right? I've got my winter vegetables in right now. I've all my summer stuff has been out thrown to the chickens, um, and you have to switch up the garden beds, right? And let the garden beds rest. And there's a season for all clients. There's a season for all orgs, and understanding that seasonality is a big part of how you learn to say no and yes to what.
Something also about setting a client avatar is to your COIs. So if you're working with a COI, I don't believe it's in your best interest as a professional to say, look, I'll work with anybody. Because think about it, if your COIs, if you're referring them business, or they're going to be very clear on who they want, or is any attorney or accountant going to say, yeah, we'll take anyone? No. And a CPA may say, look, we're only working with business owners. We're not doing just 1040 work. And attorney says, look, I'm only working with people with complicated estate planning, not a simple will. So it's very appropriate for you to say, look, I only work with clients with a net worth of $5 million or $10 million or needs like that. It really doesn't matter. But you need to set a floor because, at the end of the day, it makes you look much more professional to the COIs. And I believe they'll take you more seriously with the work that you do, where now they're going to be more intentional on referring you only to those people. So I think it's just a more effective model going forward that all your COIs know that, hey, once you establish a floor, just to let you know, here's who I work with. But now, what does that do to the psyche of that COI? If you said, it's anyone who has any questions, I'll talk to them. Or business owners with this revenue or this net worth or business worth of this, they're going to start thinking of people almost immediately to connect you with.
So there's an unspoken truth in what you just said, Carmine, as an advisor, that it took me a long time to learn this, but when you start saying I only do these things and getting clear versus the guy that says I'll take anyone, the unspoken truth is when you walk into a COI's office and you're like, hey, anybody's good or whatever, you basically have desperation on your forehead.
Yeah.
And if you walk in there and you're like, hey, I'll take anybody, like that COI, whether they are conscious of their thinking, is going to be thinking, Whereas you walk in like, this is how I help. I got 3 people I help. I want business owners that are selling a business. I want highly appreciated stock, or I want someone who wants to sell real estate and create liquidity in their estate. Those are the 3 people I like. Boom, I can help you all day long. And I've got really unique solutions for that 90% of their advisors don't have. That's my message. And so when I talk to our CPAs and attorneys and COIs, That's the message to them. Those are the people I want because I know that's scalable and I know that's going to grow my business much faster. I'll open an IRA, but only if it's related to these three areas of helping somebody, because I don't want a ton of IRAs. I don't want a ton of brokerage accounts. That's not what we're good at. And that's not where we're doing our best work.
Well said.
So let's leave it there. The principle is identifying your ideal client, having the discipline to stick to that ideal client, broadcasting who that ideal client is into the world, whether it's through COIs, websites, literature, all those type of things. Believe it or not, when you have the courage to do that, your business is going to grow much faster than it did before.